evening and welcome to We the People, brought to you by the League of Women Voters of Minneapolis. My name is Joan Higinbotham and I'll be your host for this evening's program. When we think about a 13-year-old girl, we think about somebody who loves her Hello Kitty t-shirt, probably has a crush on Justin Bieber. We don't think about a 13-year-old girl who's being forced into prostitution by a pimp who threatens her with violence, her or her family. But that happens. It happens right here in Minneapolis. And tonight we're going to talk about some of the reasons for that and what's being done to help these young women. We have two guests this evening. Our first guest is Sergeant Grant Snyder from the Minneapolis Police Department. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
And our other guest is Suzanne Koepplinger, and Suzanne is the Executive Director of the Minnesota Indian Women's Resource Center.
Hi.
Thanks for being with us.
My pleasure.
Well, this is really not a very happy subject, and you two have been in the trenches for some time working on it. I guess the first question really is this called sex trafficking now? It used to be prostitution. Why is there a name change?
Well, the federal law. In 2000, we passed the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. That was a federal law that identified juveniles who are under the age of 18 who are used in prostitution or who are used in any commercial sexual transaction as victims of a federal crime. So we really have to rethink about how we think about prostitution, and we now know that most of the women who have been prostituted were first sold as children, which makes them victims of a crime and not criminals.
And that is really a big difference in the way the law looks at them, isn't it?
Absolutely. There's a real expansion on how we view these victims, as Suzanne just said, when you talk about trafficking. I mean, but for prostitution, sex trafficking wouldn't exist. And so the definitions of prostitution really haven't changed. By talking about sex trafficking, we've just acknowledged the idea of force, fraud, and coercion, of the control of people under 18 and sometimes people over 18 that are forced into that prostitution environment. Well,
now, so the question that always comes to me is, how does this happen? How does a 13-year-old and some 12-year-old girls, how does this happen to a young child?
Well, the average age of entry into prostitution in this country is between the ages of 12 and 14. The average age. So we're working with women who were first sold at the age of 8. It is not a lifestyle choice. These children do not become brutalized and raped repeatedly night after night and then wake up at the age of 18 and decide this is their dream job. So the way it happens in a number of different ways. But as Grant mentioned, force, fraud, or coercion are often coming into play. The commonalities for kids, so if we just talk about the kids, the commonalities really are they're runaways, they're often runaways, homeless, early sexual violence, and then there's some other risk factors that involve violence in the home, addiction in the home, traumatic brain injury, some other indicators that we look at that make children particularly vulnerable. And we also have to understand that kids who are first abused at a very young age have trauma in their DNA. And they develop trauma behaviors, which oftentimes makes them look like bad kids. Mm-hmm. But these are survivors. So they have learned how to survive by sometimes acting out, by sometimes being aggressive, by sometimes lying. It doesn't make them bad kids. We have to begin to understand that they were traumatized as children. So the way it plays out, often gangs are involved, sometimes organized crime. The entrepreneurial pimp who comes on as the boyfriend, it's called finesse pimping or grooming. So there's a number of different ways it plays out, but it is a supply and demand driven enterprise. There's lots and lots of money being made by selling children's flesh.
And that's a really important comment that Suzanne just made. But for the commercial benefit to others, sex trafficking wouldn't exist. We wouldn't have sex trafficking if people didn't make money doing it. And so when we talk about how victims get involved in sex trafficking, they're lured into it, they're coerced into it, they're finessed into it by people that are willing to sell their flesh for their own profit. And there's a whole variety of risk factors. I mean, as sophisticated as we are about being able to identify the risk factors associated with an entry into juvenile sex trafficking, pimps and traffickers are just as sophisticated. Yeah. They know who to target.
So in other words, they can spot a girl standing on a street corner and say, aha, this is somebody that I could probably, as you say, coerce into doing this.
In many of our cases, Suzanne and I have talked about this at length, there's people that drive up and down Lake Street, up and down Broadway, up and down this,
just looking for people.
Just looking for people that fit a particular profile, people that they believe is somebody that they can exploit.
And they become very good at this, eh?
Absolutely.
They're very skilled. And we also know that there are certain venues that pimps will target. One of them is the Mall of America.
The Mall of America?
The Mall of America. Lots of teenage girls go to the Mall of America.
Yeah, wearing their little Hello Kitty t-shirts.
Yes. And some of these guys know exactly how to find that one girl who just had a fight with her mom, who's feeling a little depressed, who maybe feels like nobody loves her. And these guys know how to come on to them and give them the attention and the flattery that they know that they need, and then begin to get them engaged in an emotional relationship. So they're very skilled at it. We just have to be smarter than they are.
One of the most insidious things that's happening right now is the increase in peer recruitment.
Yeah.
Up to 60 to 70% of the victims that we had over the last year reported some level of peer recruitment, some involvement of their friends in sex trafficking. And you think about it, I mean, pimps are very effective. Traffickers are very effective at using girls that they know to recruit other girls.
Really?
Yes.
Now, why? Because they are told, they're forced to do it, I suppose.
There's a whole variety of
It's
different
really-
things. You
it's-
talk
yeah.
about force. I mean, it can be as simple as, you know, I love you and you love me and I really need money because I have to get my car fixed. And if you really care, this is what you'll do for me.
Mm-hmm.
And in other cases, it's just flat out violence. So if you have gang involvement, for example, some of these young girls are gang raped by gang members, and then they get a higher status. And as they get a little bit more status in the gang, they're told, well, you bring some younger girls in, and then you get a little bit easier deal. So they are, it's sort of a quid pro quo where, you know, if you bring us some young flesh, you won't get beaten tonight or you won't get raped tonight. And so that's a good thing. And so the control mechanisms that these guys use are very insidious. It's a very similar dynamic in many cases to what happens in battering relationships. In domestic violence relationships, we know that battered women tend to minimize and rationalize what's happening to them. A very similar process takes place with trafficking.
So now you, as the police, when they see this, they probably don't see what's happening when the guy picks a girl up on the street. That probably doesn't happen as often. It's after the girl's already been abused that you find out about it.
Well, you know, one of the things that we're coming to recognize as law enforcement is that our traditional way of dealing with these problems, which has always been reactive, obviously after a girl has become a victim and been repeatedly exploited, those ways, we have to look at those very carefully and we have to look hard at it. Currently, we're training all of our police officers in Minneapolis to be very proactive about approaching things like traffic stops. Something doesn't look right, it's probably because it isn't. And so, you know, there's the ability, we have the ability to prevent sex trafficking before it occurs, but it really is going to require that we're paying attention, we're reading the danger signs, and we're teaching our people who are going to be on the front line of that, whether it's police, whether it's victim advocacy, school resource officers, child protection. I mean, the signs are out there. We just have to learn how to read them and make sure that that information gets to the appropriate people.
And the thing that we find that really works is partnerships. I mean, we've begun to work so well with Grant and with Minneapolis Police Department because we know that we have to be a team. We have to work together. We have to work with public health. We have to work with the schools, as you just heard. Everybody needs to be involved in this. Child protection. We need to work with our tribal partners. So it can't just be one part of the puzzle is actually trying to do something. We all have to be involved in it. And in fact, here in Minnesota, we have a great model that we're developing. The Human Trafficking Task Force is doing terrific work with lots and lots of stakeholders who are all coming together with the same goal, and that is to end the sale of our children.
Is it possible to do that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's very, very preventable. We know who these victims are. We know what they look like. We know where they are. Now it's just a matter of making sure that we access them proactively early on. Additionally, we have to really engage the public. The public is the big uncharted frontier in all of this. That's the group of people that are going to be the first people to see and witness something that looks like trafficking.
You know, it's in the earlier days of family violence, people used to say, well, I don't want to get involved in somebody else's family. And I would guess that this is somewhat similar. If you see a guy and a young girl, you don't think it's your job or your right really to interfere. Is that something we have to sort of get over?
Yes. As in domestic violence, we have now learned that it is not just a private family problem, it's a human rights problem, it's a crime of violence, and that we all have to get involved. This is a societal problem, it's all of our concern. The stakes are even higher because these kids are really being damaged. They are being brutalized. Some of them are being killed. The thing that we also have to do is address the demand. Because as long as there is a demand, there will be a supply. And the demand is for younger and younger children. And it's partly driven by the internet, childhood porn on the internet. But unless we really hold the perpetrators accountable, the men who will purchase sex from children need to be held accountable, because that's where this is being driven by. We can help girls get out, we can prevent, and we do that, and we need to do more of that. But unless we actually target the demand side and make sure that we're holding those men accountable, we'll never put an end to it.
Well, now, the whole treatment of the men, or the Johns, that's also changed, hasn't it?
Indeed it has.
And now, how do you look at it now? I mean, it used to be a misdemeanor, right?
Well, it still is a misdemeanor if they're over 18, if the victim is over 18 years old, depending, of course, on the circumstances. But one of the important things that's happening in the law is that we recognize now that these men are child abusers. Whether or not they went to that room intending to have sex with an underage girl, that's what happened. Defensive or mistake of age is not a defense in the law, and we recognize that as a really important tool for us. Part of the issue that I think that the public has to start to be aware of, and certainly it took us time to catch up on it, is we need to know that the people that are the patrons that are fulfilling the demand side of all this, they're not who we thought they were. They're not the sociopaths and the sex addicts. That would be easier, in fact, if they were, because then we could have some level of disconnection from them. These are people that are normal. They're like us. They live across the street. They go to the same church as we do. They eat at the same restaurants. Maybe they work down in the next cube over or something like that. It really is a whole cultural problem here.
Well, now that would be very difficult for for the community to take hold of. That nice man next door couldn't do a thing like that.
Well, we've shown them time and time again.
Well, in fact, they do.
Yeah, that they do.
And so but that again is the whole problem of how do you get people the regular civilian population to be aware of what's going on.
Well, part of the challenge really is to challenge this whole concept that prostitution is a choice, or that prostitution is a victimless crime, or that women in prostitution enjoy what they're doing, or that they're getting lots of money. Those are all myths. None of that is true. Prostitution is a crime of violence, and it tends to impact those who are more vulnerable, often communities of color, certainly the poor. These are not choices that women are making about their lives. They tend to come out of very disparate circumstances. Oftentimes they were first brutalized as children, so they don't have any options, they don't have any marketable skills, they've been traumatized repeatedly. We have to challenge that whole concept that prostitution is a choice, because that is, in effect, purchasing a human being. It's somehow okay for some people to purchase a human being, which is slavery. And until we really challenge that concept, we are not going to make as much of an impact as we need to make.
Well, and I guess if you think about it that way, the people who are over 18 are in one group, but when it's child abuse, when it's under 16 or under 18, I don't know.
You know, there's that arbitrary line between being a juvenile and being an adult doesn't exist in the minds of our victims. It doesn't. It's simply there is no appreciable difference in any way, shape, or form between a victim who's 17 and a victim who's 18 years old. That's just a line that the law draws to separate being a juvenile from being an adult. And it really is a perspective problem. And it's played out time and time again with the patrons. You know, not so long ago I interviewed one that we arrested that had gone to a hotel room and paid a 17-year-old girl for sex, and I don't doubt that he didn't know that she was 17. I believe that he thought she was an adult. During that interview, he's explaining to me that he thought he was helping her. She put an ad out there, she needed money, I thought I was helping her. And my question is, where does that ideology come from? I mean, where do we where do we allow that to seep into our culture that you're helping somebody by paying them to have sex with you?
So it's the movie,
Pretty Woman.
Right.
Oh, don't get me started on that. That is such a false movie that portrays this woman as this is a glamorous lifestyle. It's so false. It is a Hollywood construct that has no basis in reality.
But it is, the man was helping her, to have a better life. And I suppose that's what this person had convinced himself too, that he was.
And whether he believed it or not, and I think he probably did, it supported his delinquent behavior.
He might have watched the film.
Right. It supported his ideology about the fact that women can be bought and sold. You can purchase somebody.
That's right.
So.
Well, purchasing, so where do you, if you're going to purchase something, you have to find out that it's available, and where do you go? You go to the want ads, right?
Correct.
So can we talk a little bit about those want ads?
Well, you know, when I first started working on this problem 13 years ago, it was street level is what we were doing. Now, of course, the internet was there at that time, but it hadn't exploded the way that it has now. I mean, with Craigslist, that really started prostitution on sex trafficking online. And now with Backpage, I mean, it's taken the number of people, the number of women who are victimized on the street has really diminished for us. We still see some of it because there's a certain dynamic that's related to that, but it's really taken it off the street and put it in the internet.
So it isn't the young person standing by the lamppost with the short skirt anymore.
Well, that still happens, but it doesn't happen with the same frequency that it did.
If you're a traveler, you can go to any city, you can come to Minneapolis, you can check into your hotel, you can go online, and you can order up a 9-year-old to be brought to your room. And who's going to know? Right? That's the way it works. And it's so pervasive. I mean, law enforcement, they don't have enough resources to track this stuff. It's going on in so many different venues, and it's so pervasive. And again, it's that normalization, that somehow this is okay, that there's some benefit to this woman if I pay her for this. And we really have to challenge that thinking.
Now, so you said Backpage, and before I started doing the research for this, I didn't exactly know what Backpage was. What exactly is it?
Backpage is an online bulletin board where you can buy and sell boats, cars, you know, household appliances.
Also, it isn't just sex, it's everything, soup to nuts.
Correct. And they have an adult services section on there, of which the body rub section for massages or the escort section is where most of our victims are being trafficked.
And so this is something where the pimp probably writes the ad of what the girl has to offer.
In some cases, but in many cases, it's even worse than that because he makes her do it. He makes her post the ad. He makes her rate the material, take photos of using her own phone in the mirror of the hotel room or whatever. I mean, think about how insidious that process is and how traumatic that is to a victim. Not only is she forced into a situation where she's going to be a slave to somebody else and she's going to be bought and sold, but she is complicit by her actions and a part of all of that. That's the real insidious nature of all
Which
this.
tells her she's a bad person, she's a criminal, and reinforces the message to her, which the pimps keep telling her, is the cops are going to lock you up, people are going to condemn you, you're nothing but a whore. I mean, all that language is used to really put those girls down, to make them feel that they are no more than a worm on the sidewalk, if even that. So the control that is exercised over them is really intense. And by the way, you have to put down a credit card in order to post an ad on Craigslist or Backpage. Backpage is making lots and lots of money off of the sale of juveniles.
So there is a record. Your name is on the credit card if you're
Somebody's name.
somebody's name.
A lot of times we're seeing prepaid credit cards, NetSpend, Vanilla Visa, some of those. I mean, this is all very calculated, and it's calculated and designed to protect the trafficker, and it's designed to protect the patrons.
Yeah.
The only people that aren't being protected are juvenile victims.
Now, what happens to a young girl? You not arrest her, but you take her in for whatever. Is there a place for her to go? Suzanne, is that where you come in?
So this is a huge gap in services right now. We have a total of 4 shelter beds in the state of Minnesota for trafficked juveniles.
4 beds?
4. Yes, so this is a huge problem. This is a subset of the population that needs specific services. They need extensive care. There's a lot of trauma that needs to be addressed, depending on if they're an English speaker, if they have English as a second language, medical care, mental health care, housing, all of the things that are needed. We are trying to create that model, and in fact, we have created that model. The Human Trafficking Task Force created the No Wrong Door for Services model. It is the first in the country. If we can pass this in the state of Minnesota, we will be the first state in the country to provide a statewide network of housing and services that are designed to specifically serve the needs of this population. Right now we don't have it. We do the best we can, but there's a huge gap, is the housing piece.
And from a law enforcement perspective, I can't tell you how critical that is. Having a place to take these children where we know that they're going to be well cared for, they're going to be treated appropriately, because a correctional placement isn't appropriate for them. Yeah. And a lot of times a treatment-based placement isn't appropriate for them either. We can't just put them someplace where they can spend the night. These are kids that have very particular security needs. They have trust issues that are unlike anything we've seen before. The level of trauma, it's just impossible to overestimate how significant that really is to them. We have to have a place to take these kids where they're not only going to be safe, but they're going to feel safe and they're going to be treated appropriately.
So sometimes it's possible to reunify them with a safe adult. And whenever that is possible, that's what we want to do. So we do the direct service piece, and we work with many girls who have suffered this horrible trauma. Sometimes we can work with other service providers, other youth shelters, but those are not always ideal placements. We need to have a specific set of services and housing that is directly targeting the needs of these kids. That's where our hope lies, and the No Wrong Door bill actually provides that, and it will save the taxpayer money. We did the cost-benefit analysis on this project, and we found that we can save the Minnesota taxpayer $34 for every $1 they invest in a quality early intervention and prevention program like this.
Now, this is called the No Wrong Door, and it's legislation that's at the legislature now as we speak.
Yes, it's in conference committee right now.
And now, I thought it was interesting too, as I was reading this, that the police were not really trusted by some of these young women because of the people that had been talking to them about how the police were going to arrest them. So have you sort of switched your way of operating with these young women?
You know, that's been a historic problem. No matter what population we're dealing with, nobody really likes to deal with the police. I mean, everything we do is intrusive to a certain point.
Officer friendly.
Right. So it's really come down to us learning and relearning and rethinking how we approach this particular group. I mean, the concerns. We've made a lot of these issues for ourselves in the way that we talk to the victims, in the way we attempt to interview them. Now we've gone to a much more victim-centered, or what we like to call a victim-partnered approach, where we're taking the time to build the rapport that's so necessary to serve these kids. It's not a case-driven approach anymore. If we can rescue a child, that's our primary objective. Also, obviously, from a public service and a public safety perspective, we understand that we need to make sure and lock up the people that are perpetrating on it, because otherwise they're going to do it to other people. But the most effective route to get to that is through a partnership with that victim, and we're never going to have that unless we build that rapport up front.
And I will say that we have really found Grant to be a wonderful partner to work with, and really are encouraged by Minneapolis Police Department dedicating more resources to being more involved on the front end, reaching out to youth that are on the streets. St. Paul Police has a trafficking task force. So we're really seeing a lot of positive changes in working with law enforcement partners, and we have to. We have to work together.
Well, it's a change, a whole complete shift. It's a crime. It's no longer a crime. Now the crime is the person who's prostituting the young girl, not the girl.
Yes.
And it's just that the responsibility and the culpability for that violation is now placed where it belonged in the first place.
Now, I know that in some places they have the John school where the John has to go to sort of hopefully get his mind changed about what he's done. Is that being done here in Minneapolis?
We don't have an
Minneapolis,
organized, we don't have an organized John school here.
St. Paul has.
St. Paul has an organized John school through Breaking Free. And we've had a number of conversations with Breaking Free. Anything at the end of the day that you can do to change attitudes and change demand is going to make a difference, is going to impact this problem effectively in positive ways.
Now, I guess I'll be kind of cynical about this and say, well, so the guy gets picked up and he gets talked to and told that this is really not a good thing that he's done. Does he change his attitude, or does he just...
Well, Breaking Free will tell you that the recidivism rate for men that go through their John school is very, very low. So whether they're not reoffending, or they're reoffending in another county, or they're not getting caught, we don't know. But the recidivism rate is low. So the way we look at it, there are men, if you educate them, if they learn that this is actually a crime of violence, that you're not doing this woman a favor, you're not doing this child a favor, you're actually inflicting additional harm, a lot of men will get that and say, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm done. But then there's a whole nother group of men that are going to sit in John school and make a joke out of it, and they're just going to get more careful. And then there's the other group that are psychopaths, and these are the guys that need to go to jail. And the differentiation in the way we treat, and traditionally have treated women, primarily adult women who have been prostituted, they go to jail.
Right.
The men go to school.
Yeah.
Right?
Right. And that's why the significance of being able to charge men with a felony, and I'm full believer in charging men that patronize adult women that are being trafficked with a felony. I think that it's appropriate. I think we know enough about the effect of this, the lifelong changes and ways that it impacts a victim's life, that would be an appropriate way for us to handle that. That felony conviction, those felony charges, are an extremely powerful tool in us changing their behavior.
And the media attention that they get. So there have been a couple of cases that have been widely publicized. Right. And other people see that, and they say, okay, I'm not going to do that because I don't want to go to jail. I don't want my picture splashed all over the TV station.
Right.
So the media attention that is put on those cases is a very important part of getting the message out that this will not be tolerated.
You know, the media, that brings up another question. Is people always say, well, why, we read in the media that Minnesota is really a hotbed of this. Why is it? We think of ourselves as being, good, upstanding folk.
Minnesota nice.
Yeah, Minnesota nice. We have a lot of characteristics that kind of predispose us to having some of these problems.
Really?
Yeah, we're kind of a hub. A lot of people come here. A lot of people go through here. We have a large population of very diverse communities, and wherever you have that, you have sex trafficking victims. Some of which are open conspiracies that they're marketed on Backpage, and some of which are closed conspiracies where it's marketed. And we've seen some of that already within some of the communities where we've found people that were being exploited within the community itself. So there's a whole bunch of different factors that lead us to that place of prominence.
And the other thing to know is that Duluth and the port cities are also a prime trafficking site because of the salties. So the salties come into port. These guys have been at sea for a long time. It used to be, we knew that girls were being put on the ships. We had confirmed reports from Duluth police that girls were being put on the ships. Homeland Security started to tighten up access. That, to our understanding, is no longer happening. But the freighter crews just come off of the ships, and they are able to find girls that they can buy sex from there in Duluth. So anytime there's a marketplace, we have to look at what's going on there. The other place that we're looking at with some significant concern are the oil fields of North Dakota.
Oh, I suppose that makes sense.
We know there are girls that are being recruited here in Minneapolis
And taken there.
to be brought up to the oil fields to be sold repeatedly in the man camps.
And not just from here, but from virtually every city in the country, because it's such a lucrative prospect for their traffickers.
So it sounds to me like the really big thing is the money.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
If people weren't making money off of these kids, it wouldn't be
There'd be
going
no
on.
reason to do it.
Wouldn't be going on.
At the end of the day, sex trafficking is about one thing, and that's about the commercial sale of our kids for sex.
Yeah.
They take away the money, you don't have sex trafficking.
So that's sort of a grim way to end it tonight, but that's the story. It's a story about money, and it's a story about violence, and it's a story about our children. So hopefully this has given you some new insights into a problem that we face here in Minnesota, but also some hope that we're looking at really positive ways of making things better. So thanks to our guest for this evening, Grant Snyder from the Minneapolis Police Department. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Suzanne Koepplinger, the Executive Director of the Minnesota Indian Women's Resource Center.
Thanks.
And thank you for tuning in to We the People, brought to you by the League of Women Voters. This is Joan Higinbotham saying good night. We hope you'll join us again.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You did pretty well. You got a lot covered.
We managed to get us